God takes over, and I'm blown away, and I realize that God can and will use people if they're willing to be, willing to let Him. Worship in itself, as we said, it comes from the heart. While there's a wrong way, there's not one right way to do it. But I definitely believe when I step aside and don't rely too much on my own ability, that just amazing things happen.
It's another week of Inside the Bible, a weekly podcast with spiritual insights on biblical truth. Welcome, my name's Andrew Winman, and this week we continue our series in the book of Judges, the life of Sampson. We last left off with Sampson being tricked into exposing the mystery of his riddle. And what we discovered was Sampson was a man who did not care about living on the edge. He was a man who liked to live on the edge, liked to take risks, because he gloried in his own strength. Much like many people who are given a task where they're in the spotlight. They're kind of exposed to the public and really have a lot of qualities and traits that are admirable to people. And as a result, they decide, hey, I'm going to go where temptation dwells and risk being exposed to it. Well, in Samson's case, he risked that, took that risk, and wound up breaking some covenants which he made to the Lord as a Nazirite. And yet in the end, he thought, hey, I'll glory in that. I'll put my sin in the form of a riddle, boast about it a little bit. And when his wife came on to him, he exposed the mystery of his riddle and discovered how easy it is to pretty much give away too much information when you put so much confidence in your own work. I find it interesting that Samson gloried in his sin. So much, though, that he thought he could drop some hints about what he did, the works he performed in sinning, without actually exposing his sin fully. Thinking, hey, I can still keep this a secret, but drop hints about where I've been, what I've done. And yet, in the end, it all came out. I think in some ways we can make that same mistake if we've exposed ourselves to different types of sins, to different types of capacities, to the point where we wind up maybe joking in some perverse ways or making some references to things that are not too wholesome. And yet over the course of time, the more we talk in a way or walk in a way that's impure before God, eventually the truth will come out as to where we've been and what we've done. But we came to the end of chapter 14, where Samson's wife, due to Samson's absence, was given to his companion. The father of Samson's wife decided, hey, Samson's been away for a while. He must not want her anymore. And he gave her away. And all this was due to the situation where the Philistines sort of got a hand over Samson, won the bet, had him go out and slay 30 Philistines and bring back 30 coats and goods. And as a result, Samson, in his absence, lost his wife because his father-in-law gave her away. And so it says here in chapter 15, it came to pass within a while, after in the time of wheat harvest, some time had passed, that Samson visited his wife with a kid, that is to say, a goat. Kind of just a peace offering, I guess you could say. And he said, I will go in to my wife into the chamber. But her father would not let him go in. And her father said, I truly thought that you had hated her, I thought you had utterly hated her, in other words. Therefore, I gave her to your companion. Is it not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I ask you, instead of your bride. So in other words, I thought you had hated your wife because you've been away for quite some time. You ran off. So I gave her to your companion. But hey, isn't her younger sister more fairer, more attractive looking? Well, why don't you take her instead? It's kind of interesting how in those days, women were seen more of an object rather than people. I don't know what it is about the nature of humanity to treat a gender or a class of people sometimes as less significant due to some inferior characteristics. And yet, Sampson seeking after his wife, and even his unwillingness to go with his father-in-law's suggestion to say, hey, forget it, I'll just take the younger sister instead, goes to show how precious she was to him, in a way. I mean, I know we talked about how it was a sin for him to be married to her. And yet, in a way, the fact that he did not take that proposal, but just gave it all away completely, just goes to show how precious a soul is, regardless of the gender, and how making such foolish proposals, well, that's what it is, foolish. A few weeks ago, we talked about how Jacob was grieved over the fact that his sons were in such a mess to the point where Joseph was gone and Simeon was in prison, and now they wanted to take Benjamin away. And one of the brothers stood up and said, look, if we don't bring back your 2 other sons, kill my 2 sons. An ignorant proposal. But from his son's perspective, he thought that the father would not have as much value as his 2 other sons, as if a revenge tactic would solve the issue. I think sometimes we don't quite understand the value of a soul to other people. We almost treat people like objects in our mind. Oh, that person passed away, or that person is absent. Oh, isn't that sad? Well, hey, we'll find you new friends. Doesn't quite get to the core of how much people mean to us. And in the same way, Sampson's father's proposal is ignorant. But Sampson is, of course, enraged by this. A dumb proposal, a tough circumstance. But if you remember in chapter 14, when Sampson first married this girl, and it was wrong. It was wrong for him to marry her. A verse early on in chapter 14 did say that God would use it to stir up jealousy in Sampson, so that he could seek an occasion against them. And now we will finally find the instance here, where Sampson was first taken advantage of, because he proposed the riddle. They came on to his wife, had her take the answer from him by threatening her and her father's life. And now Sampson has lost his wife due to the misfortune, and now he'll be stirred to jealousy. In verse 3, as it said, Sampson said concerning them, now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure. In other words, I'm going to bring harm to them, but I will be blameless. because they are more in the wrong in his mind. And Sampson went and caught 300 foxes and took firebrands and turned tail to tail and put first firebrands on the midst between two tails. And he said, set the brands on fire, and he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines, and burn up both the stalks and also the standing corn and the vineyards and the olives. Whenever I was a kid, my sister was worried that there was this mouse in her shoebox, and so she wanted me to open it up, release any mice that might be inside, and set it on fire. But she told me, let the mice loose first, because if you catch the mice on fire, they'll go and run and they'll catch everything ablaze, even something as small as a mouse. Well, in the same way here, foxes, of course, you light the tails on fire, they go crazy, they're going to run in a panic. They don't know the rule of stop, drop, and roll, and what a creative way for Sampson to try to get revenge. Catch 300 foxes, light the tails on fire, or light a stick on fire, tie it to the tail, and let them loose throughout the cornfields. Ruin the harvest. And yet we're about to find out how Samson's act of revenge just stirs the jealousy and anger in the Philistines so that they take revenge in return. The ping-pong effect. The Philistines, verse 6, said, "Who has done this?" And they answered, "Sampson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he had taken his wife and given her to his companion." And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire. And Samson said unto them, "Though you have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after that I will cease." And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. And he went down and dwelt in the top of the rock of Etam. A ping-pong effect. I took revenge. You took revenge. I take revenge again. And then I'll be satisfied. But is he satisfied? Not in the least bit will he be satisfied. Why? Because the Philistines won't be satisfied. When he commits a slaughter of many of them, they're going to react. They're going to seek his life and seek to bring him into bondage, and that's what they will do. And so in verse 9, the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi. And the men of Judah said, "Why have you come against us?" And they answered, "To bind Samson. That's why we have come, to do him as he has done to us." And 3,000 men of Judah went to the top of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is this that you have done unto us?" And he said unto them, "As they did to me, so I have done to them." And they said unto him, "We are come down to bind you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines." And Samson said unto them, "Swear unto me that you will not fall upon me yourselves." And they spoke unto him, saying, "No, but we will bind you fast and deliver you into the hands of the Philistines. But surely we will not kill you." And they bound him with 2 new cords and brought him up from the rock. Early in this series, we talked about how there are many, despite the contrast, similarities between Samson and Jesus. And in this case, Samson being the warrior, in contrast to Christ, he was delivered into the hands of his oppressors. We see here a case of that. A case of these men who are Judites, the men of Judah, which ironically was the tribe that Jesus was born from. These men who were so concerned with the Philistines rolling over them for fear, handed who would have been the promised light to overcome the Philistines and save Israel. They handed him right over. It wasn't a case of, you're the man that was promised. In fact, they didn't know he was the promised one, to my knowledge. And so in an instant, not recognizing his might, his abilities, they bound him, handed him over. Didn't do him harm personally. They wanted their hands clean of that. Well, look who also wanted their hands clean of the harm that came to Christ. The Jews said our hands are clean, ignorant to how dirty they actually were for handing him over. And so in the same case, they hand Sampson over. Send him out. Didn't harm his life, left that to the hands of the Philistines. But interestingly enough, when he came unto Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his hands loosened from off his, or the bands loosened from off his hands. So just as Christ was bound by death, went to Hades for 3 days, overcame the shouts of the wicked, the shouts of the enemy, the armies of the enemy, and defeated death. The Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon Sampson and resurrected him too. Brought forth strength in him to overcome the attempts of the Philistines, to overcome him. And it's interesting too, because fire is so often compared to purity, as it purifies gold, silver, precious metals. The fire of the Spirit came upon Sampson, gave him the power to rip those binds around his body as if they were just burning off like fire on rope. But in contrast to Jesus, in contrast to Christ who overcame death and preached righteousness and lived righteously, Sampson himself commits an act of unrighteousness. As it says here in verse 15, he found the new jawbone of a donkey, and put forth his hand and took it and slew thousands of men with it. And Sampson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, and with the jaw of a donkey have I slain thousands of men. Number one, whose strength was it? Who did he receive his strength from? Well, it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. It was the Spirit of God living in Sampson that enabled him. But secondly, his covenant. Not to touch any unclean thing, not to go and live impurely, by laying his hands on the carcass of a dead animal. And yet that's what he slew the Philistines with. So often in the same way, new believers who shine in the spotlight can honestly boast in themselves so much. They don't recognize when they're toying with sin. A man who recently came to the Lord and released an album that has hit the top charts in so much of the country has boasted in himself very much recently. Earlier today, he called himself the best artist that's now working for God. Now, I don't know the context of this man's statements. I haven't heard him firsthand. And I know as a young new believer, not young in age, but young in character, it takes time to develop humility and understanding in the faith as to who the glory is to go to. And so we as believers ought not to criticize, but to pray. To pray wholeheartedly that a man such as him doesn't boast in his works, but boasts in the Lord. Why? Because it's instances like those, much like this one, where the boasting can cause a person to miss the mark, instinctively break a covenant in some area, such as Sampson did right here, breaking the covenant, grabbing the jawbone of a donkey. And though he slayed the Philistines, and God used it, he knew not that he had just committed a work against his covenant with the Lord, and proceeded to boast in himself. With the jawbone I have slain thousands of men. With the jawbone I have made heaps upon heaps. Verse 17. And it came to pass that when he had made an end of speaking, that he cast away the jawbone out of his hands, and called that place Ramathali. Ramathali, believe is how it's pronounced. Ramath Lehi. And he was sore athirst, and called unto the Lord, and said, You have given this great deliverance into the hand of your servant. And now shall I die for thirst, and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised? And God claved a hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came water thereout. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again and revived, and therefore he called the name thereof Enhakhori. I don't know if I'm pronouncing these right. Just go along with it. Which is Lehi unto this day. And he judged Israel and the days of the Philistines 20 years. Boast in himself. Breaks the covenant of the Lord by touching a dead animal. And makes a demand from the Lord. Shall I now die here? Now that I've committed a work for you, shall I die here? Feed me. Feed me, Lord. After boasting in himself. Taking the work that the Lord performed through him, with the giftings that God had given him, demanding blessing from God. May the Lord keep us from such mistakes. May the Lord make us wise not to fall in such areas of sin, where our character shows a sense of esteem in ourselves, rather than our boast being in the Lord. May God protect us from that the enemy not overcome us. May the Lord bless and keep you in the way you should go this week. God bless.